So my journey started by selecting a book called Winter in Algeria, written by Ellen Rogers. In 1852 till 1853, she accompanied her husband to Algeria. I then moved to discover a little bit more about her background and discovered Baya Maadine from Algeria, an artist, a young artist. And then I end the series with myself, with 1001 Nights, which was translated by André Pierre Brink. It took quite a long time because we started in 2018. And first I tried to disseminate the book, and that was quite difficult because the English was very old English and quite hard for me to read. But the layering of colonialism was very evident in her language and the way she wrote. I then sort of wanted to connect it to the next century with Baya Maadine, and that kind of helped me to find a visual language that I could deal with. And Queen Victoria also actually did drawings, and so those were interesting connections that I was starting to stitch between the women, and then I ended up with the fairy tales of 1001 Nights.
This is the book that I selected from all the books that Chris Reinders had available for the project. Chris Reinders is an artist and a bookseller who had all these old books in storage, and he wanted to create a book project around it under the theme of decolonizing the book. So how do we take a book like this, which is In Darkest Africa, Volume 2 by Henry Morton Stanley, and how do we engage with a text like this, which today raises a lot of problematic issues, but back in the day, a man like Stanley who wrote this book, and the reading public for this book was very large, and it was really influential in how certain ideas were conveyed. Today we recognize that there are issues with this. So what do we do with a book like this? And as some of the other artists deconstructed the book, broke it apart. What I did is I decided to try and engage with the text by rewriting over it with other texts. So if this is a flat plan of the artist book that I ended up creating, which is a physical object. This is just a wall chart so people can engage with it a bit more closely. So in the back we have the original text, which I scanned in. Over that, I've overlain it with quotes by Frans Fanon, a Martinican physician and a key decolonial thinker who was very instrumental also in the decolonizing of Algeria. So these are quotes on top. So at the same time as this colonial text, we have a counter voice, which is the anti-colonial voice coming in. And then a third layer of texts are placed over that, and when I say text, I'm actually referring to the illustrations, the Victorian woodcut engravings, which also during Victorian times became an important part of promoting products, selling products. Colonialism was very intertwined with extracting raw materials from the colonies and manufacturing. Good example in South Africa is the ostrich feather farms, for example, where the types of hats that Victorian ladies wore, even certain soldiers' uniform relied on a lot of ostrich feathers, and we saw that economy booming, which has since gone bust. So essentially, in a nutshell, it's about overlaying multiple texts to see how they engage with each other, to get us to talk and have dialogue. So I'm not trying to be didactic and tell you what you need to think. I don't know what the answer is to decolonizing the book. I think it's something we need to think and talk about and engage with. I don't know what the final answer is, but I think a first step for me is to contrast and engage with multiple forms of text, and that's what I'm trying to do, yeah.
Well, my body of work here actually has 4 parts, but the summary of it all is actually just to tell more stories, tell more diverse stories, because as soon as we stick to just one narrative, then we get boxed in pretty quickly, and a lot of people are isolated as a result of it. It's quite a long journey. It's been quite a few years. The project was launched in 2018. The book club that is exhibiting here today or over the next month has been around since 2017. But the specific project started in 2018 for us. And it started out with us all meeting together with a larger group than who is exhibiting here today And we were basically presented with a range of books, largely old Afrikaner, works that were either partly damaged or out of date in terms of how they spoke about society. And we were told to pick one and use it as a starting point to respond to the idea of decolonization. So I chose a book from the collection that was already partly damaged. It was the British Colonies Division 7. And it's a book in a series that speaks about the possessions of the British colonies in Africa. And from there I started to deconstruct the book. I took the book apart, and the book cover had a really beautiful embossing on it. So I used that as the basis for a set of relief prints that I allowed to kind of fade off in a set of ghost prints, almost mimicking the idea of a dominant narrative that would fade away to make space for more stories. And in 2019, we wrote a paper for the project as a type of reflection on where we were at that point. And in response to that reflection, some of the works were extended. And that is how we got here. Many years later, there were obviously a number of delays along the way. COVID put a couple of roadblocks in our path, but it's been a very rich journey to get here. So Cheryl's work is actually remarkably dense. She uses a stream of consciousness approach to her work. So she chose the book, it was the Jan van Riebeeck's diary, yes, that's correct. And she went through it and she realized that her own history or her own position in Johannesburg was quite contentious. She had inherited a colonial layout garden which she had maintained over her life. And so she wanted to speak to this idea of land and land ownership, and how does land and rezoning of land actually influence how we have a relationship with our place in the world. So her work deals with those issues and her own idea of where she fits into the picture through capturing her thoughts about what was happening around her in an area that was being rezoned at that point in time, and with her garden, which she was very, very fond of and which she drew a lot of inspiration from, considering the debates happening at the time around land ownership. So you'll find that her work is a lot more of a collection of items that were part of her reflection or that prompted reflection. There are some of her own diary entries in there. There are objects that she's collected from the environment, pieces of other projects that she's worked on that speaks to similar themes, and she's collated into this case file, almost as if she's examining what's happening around her.